Hey guys, welcome to session 7 of Introduction to Linux System Administration. As always, I am your instructor, Kevin Downs. Today, we're going to be covering Linux file security. So last session, we went over file system types, conventional directory structure, mounting a file system, the /etc/fs tab file, special files, hard file links, soft file links, creating new file systems with mkfs or make file system, the lost and found directory, repairing file systems with fscheck, the journaling attribute, and file and disk management tools. Today, we're going to be going over file permissions, directory permissions, octal representation, changing permissions, setting default permissions, access control list, the get facl and set facl commands, the suid bit, the sgid bit, and the sticky bit. Let's go ahead and start with file permissions here and some basic file permissions and permission groups. So each file and directory has 3 user-based permission groups. First one's going to be owner. The owner permissions apply only the owner of the file or directory, and they will not impact the actions of other users. Next, we have the group. The group permissions apply only to the group that has been assigned to the file or directory. They will not affect the actions of other users. Finally, we have other. The other permissions apply to all other users on the system. This is the permission group that you will want to watch the most. So if someone isn't a part of the owner, isn't a part of the group, then they're going to be other. Okay? Let's talk about permission types here. So each file directory has 3 basic permission types. Read. The read permission refers to a user's capability to read the contents of the file. We have write. The write permission refers to a user's capability to write or modify a file or directory. And finally, we have execute. And the execute permission affects a user's capability to execute a file or view the contents of a directory. So let's talk about how these apply to directories. So again, we're going to have read. And on a directory, this is going to give you the ability to read the contents of the directory. For example, do an ls. Next, we have write. And write on a directory is going to give you the ability to write into the directory. So, i.e., create files and directories. So you'll be able to create things inside of that directory. Execute gives you the ability to actually enter the directory. So, in other words, cd into that directory, okay? So these permissions work differently on directories and files, okay? So get familiar with how they interact separately on files and directories. So let's look at octal representation of these permissions, okay? This is a little bit easier way to set permissions, especially if you're trying to do more than one group at a time. So octal notation is a numerical system for modifying the permissions on Linux, Mac, and other Unix-like file systems. Each octal permission can be represented by 3 or 4 numbers, where each of these numbers is an octal, meaning they range from 0 to 7. Each one of the numbers represents permissions that can be set either for a file or a directory. So you guys, we're going to see here the octal representation for each one here. So read, or R, is equal to 4. Write, or W, is equal to 2. And execute, or X, is equal to 1. Okay. Now, if we add all of these up, we get 7. And we can use any combination of these octals to represent certain permissions. So, for example, I could do 6. And that would represent read and write, okay? And we see that here, 6. So that's for the user group. And we could do 4, which would be read, and that would be for the group permissions. And then we have another 4, which would be, again, read, and that would apply to other permissions. And we can see that here in written form, read, write, and write, okay? So when made up of 3 numbers, each one of the octals represent each of the groups that have access to the file. So for example, the octal 724 represents a situation where 7 is the octal for the setting owner permissions, 2 represents the group permissions, and 4 represents other permissions. So here's kind of a breakdown, guys, of that example we just saw up there. So we have owner. The permissions are set to 7, which means they have read, write, execute. Okay, 4 plus 2 plus 1 is 7. Then we have group, which is set to 2. So all they have is write permissions. So we see that up here, write equals 2. And then we have other, which is 4. Okay, so that means other has read permissions, just 4. All right. So how do we change permissions? So changing permissions, we use the chmod command. So it's quite simple to use this while using octal notation. The structure of the command is simply chmod or chmod, and then octal permissions we wish to set, and then the file directory. So a quick example here. We have chmod 777 myfile.txt. This will give read, group, and other read, write, execute permissions for all of them. Okay, let's actually check this out a little bit on our virtual box here. Let's show a couple examples. So I'm going to do a quick ls. Actually, I'm going to show you where I'm at. Oops. Turn my caps lock off. Alright, so we're at my home directory. I'm doing ls. We see some basic files there. I'm going to create a file. I'm just going to call it testfile.txt. And you'll see now I have that test file. And let me clear my screen real quick. Let's do a long listing to show the permissions on it. So right now, test file has read, write, and read for user, group, and other. Okay, so a user here. The first three, 1, 2, 3. So just read and write. We have group, which are the next three, 1, 2, 3. Okay, they have read and write. And then the last three, 1, 2, and 3, which is other. And they have read permissions. Now remember, this first one here is reserved for the file or type. So that's telling me these are all directories. This is nothing here, which means it's a file. Okay, so we're going to do a chmod. We're going to use 777 for test file. Do a long listing again. And now we can see that on that file, we have read, write, execute, and read, write, execute for test file. Okay. Let me clear my screen. We can also take away permissions the same way. So right now it's 777. I could do 444 test file. Do a long listing, and now we see it just has read for the permissions there. Okay, that's how we do an octal form. That's how we change permissions, and that's how we give and take away permissions, is with that chmod command. Let's head back to our PowerPoint. So how do we set default permissions? So I have a folder which I want to share with read-write permissions for a selected group of users. Let's say the folder is /music, and I want to share it with the group media. What we want to do is not only have users accessing files in music with read-write access, but also to ensure that all files created in music will have ownership, user, media, and permissions read-write, and read. So to achieve this, guys, I'm going to have to use two tools. I'm going to have to either use the set group ID or the ACL, which is the access control list, which we're going to go over. But I also recommend doing a man of ACL so you can be familiar with everything that is capable of.